Ghostbusters 1 was a great movie. The sequel wasn't as much, and that is the consensus, even if you disagree. So, what exactly should the sequel have been? What's the consensus on that? I want to answer that question once and for all by exploring all the options. The hardest part is probably the magic system that was set up in the first film, so let's start with that. First of all, there's a powerful extra-dimensional being named Gozer who can take physical forms. Gozer was worshipped by cults in ancient civilizations who wanted to die. The cult would worship him until he had enough energy to take physical form. Once in physical form, the worshippers would choose a final form for him, and he would kill the entire civilization in that form. Maybe they thought they would be rewarded for this. Maybe that's why they did this. One cult survived just long enough into modern times to build an apartment building in New York. The apartment building was designed to be like a lightning rod for energy, so that even without any humans worshipping him in modern times, Gozer has enough energy to open the gate and take physical form. Part of this design was the dog monsters built into the statues that would be energized enough to break free first and possess humans. That way, Gozer still has enough human worshippers, even though they're unwilling without the possession. The exact role of the two humans was then to have sex, and that ritual would ultimately be the thing that opened up the gate. Maybe this is because sex exists in order to create life, so maybe the fertilized egg is physically taken out for a super fast birth. Or maybe there's just life energy that can be taken from the act of sex that would normally go into a baby, but instead is put into Gozer to energize his growth. And then the human Ghostbusters accidentally chose the final form for Gozer, even though they weren't supporters of Gozer. They chose a random food mascot. The humans used for the sex ritual then got physically transformed into the dogs that they're possessed by. If Gozer survives, those dogs will probably sit dormant until the next cycle, and I assume the personalities of the victims would still be in the dogs, right? That's probably why the dogs seemed to be intelligent earlier, and why Dana and Tully, these victims, seem to be able to spout so much information when they're possessed in the middle part of the movie. Maybe it's because some Gozer worshippers, maybe named Vinz Clortho and Zool, got possessed intentionally, so their personalities would be inside the dogs from then on. We don't see these humans at the end of the movie, so if this is the case, then it seems like they died along with the dog monsters. But they were worshippers of Gozer, so that's probably not exactly a tragedy that they're gone. And it seems like the dogs are invisible, except to the people they're about to possess, right? We can't see them in this scene, and the restaurant patrons don't seem to either, but the monsters seem like they have physical effects anyway, because you can throw a coat on them, and they can knock the doorman out of the way at the entrance, so that's an interesting dynamic there. So you can see and feel their effects, but not see their actual bodies until they target you. Or maybe the doorman saw the dog, but the people in the restaurant didn't, because the dog made itself invisible once it got into the restaurant area. And it seems like Gozer can pick his own form before he starts destroying. And if so, does he do so in order to show off his transforming abilities? Or does he stay in whatever form people choose for him last time he was on Earth? When Dana, the first possession victim, opened up her refrigerator and Gozer shows her the portal, was Gozer commanding her to worship him? And then when she slammed the door, did the demon dogs have no choice but to possess her? Is that how that works? And is this whole magic system an explanation for why Jesus and other gods want to be worshipped? At least in the Ghostbusters movie universe. Is it because all gods, or higher level beings, including the benevolent ones, get their power in ways that are similar to Gozer's and the ghosts, but different rituals, instead of the sex and mental projection of choosing the form. Might be a good thing to think about, even if we don't directly imply anything about that. The team shoots the gateway to defeat Gozer, not the Marshmallow Man himself. So is that where his energy source is? Or is that where his real body is, and he's just projecting himself from the other dimension into the Marshmallow Man as his avatar? Or it's both. He's projecting a form and projecting energy to that form. And by the way, that energy is also going into ghosts. Ghosts are now appearing as a result of the energy that Gozer is bringing. So what are ghosts in the world of this movie? Maybe it's a complete copy of a person from before their body is completely destroyed, and that's what the quote-unquote afterlife is. Or maybe it's just the people who get lost along the way to the actual afterlife. Or maybe it's just the impure parts of a person. So they're the parts of the person that don't belong in the nice afterlife. Kind of like how some Christians interpret the wheat and the chaff parable in the Bible. And maybe some people are so bad that they're mostly majority just flaws. So barely any part of them goes into heaven. Or they are projections, just like Gozer, from another dimension, and maybe even projections from the same dimension as him. The only difference would be that Gozer probably originated in the other dimension, while the ghosts almost certainly originated as humans on Earth first, and then went to the other dimensions, and then would be coming back to Earth. So, is that why the ghosts are transparent? And you can see that the level of physicality of these ghosts seems to vary, by the way. So, some look very solid, some don't. And as for the tangibility levels, it's harder to say. The taxi cab driver looks solid and can drive a car, but maybe other ghosts can do that too. The green gluttonous ghost, Slimer as he's called in later installments, can pass through walls, but he's also moving plates of food around. So maybe the cab driver is no different. Maybe the cabbie could pass through a wall if he wanted to. I personally prefer if he isn't able to, just because he doesn't look like he can. So I think we can just say that because Slimer is halfway in the human world, that means he has fewer atoms here. So they're able to slip between the atoms of the wall, like in the Flash movie. But then we'll just say that he has the effect of squeezing his atoms together whenever he tenses up his body in order to make them dense, so that way he can grab his food. Or are the ghosts transparent just because their minds can only regenerate their bodies depending on how vivid their own memory of it is? And I guess that's what their body was like at the time of death, for the ones that look like corpses. Or maybe it's a combination of the two. Maybe they're projections based on a hazy memory of their death. And by the way, maybe that hazy memory can become distorted based on their thoughts and behavior after death. Maybe that's what's going on with the gluttonous green ghost. And is the Gozer dimension, the dimension that Gozer is from, and or the ghost dimension, are these completely different from places like heaven, hell, or purgatory? Do these places exist in the Ghostbusters universe? And if hell exists, is it bad because it tortures people who go there? Or is it simply filled with ugly, broken people and therefore seen as bad by any good people who accidentally go there by mistake? So maybe the gluttonous green ghost in the hotel was eating like a pig before he got to the hotel on Earth, in a place that we would call hell, but only because it's filled with gross creatures like him. To him, it's heaven. And maybe it's all relative. Another option is basically the gluttonous green ghost has been asleep until Gozer charged him up, so now he's eating again. Or he's been starving in hell as torture and gained all this weight recently after escaping hell to get to Earth. Or maybe he's been starving in hell as torture and gained all this weight recently after escaping hell to get to Earth. So, if it's only while Gozer is around that the ghosts are able to take their more visible, more physical form, they could dim out maybe back to their home dimensions or back into being barely anything when he leaves. Now, it doesn't seem like that's what Slimer does, because we see him at the end as a teaser, so I wouldn't think so, but maybe there's a delay, and this is just a teaser for him to return when the next supervillain pops up. Or maybe he's stuck while he's halfway through the portal. That's why he's still halfway visible, even though the portal is closed around him, preventing him from coming in, or even to prevent him from coming all the way in. But either way, what about the range of the portal? Was the specially designed apartment only awakening/freeing ghosts around that specific area of uptown Manhattan? A limited range? So, if Gozer or an entity like him in the sequel, or the portal for the villain in the sequel, is traveling around in the sewer or a subway train, maybe it could awaken/free even more ghosts than the first film, because it's covering more ground. And maybe the Ghostbusters at some point could get stuck in that other dimension where all the ghosts reside, and they gotta fight bad guys in that world. And maybe the Ghostbusters are only able to partially come back to the world of the living, so they become ghostly. And maybe their car was sent with them too, so you have a ghostly version of their car driving around too, weirding people out while trying to save the day. Maybe the reason they can only partially come back is that they have a limited amount of energy for the technology that they use to get back. Or maybe they can only open up the portal so wide so they can only project at a certain vividness. So they're just like Slimer, the librarian ghost, and so on. By the way, this ghost car idea comes from Jay of the YouTube channel Fix It with Adam and Jay. So thanks, Jay. Now, expanding on this, is matter more malleable in the ghost realm? Is that the reason why the forms of the ghosts are so freakish and distorted? If so, maybe in the ghost realm, the heroes can use the ghostly energy to make any kind of tool or weapon they need to win the day. You just twist the material around you like clay. But maybe you can do this through thought alone. Maybe it's mind over matter over there. One gag you could get out of this is that while the team is inside the ghost realm, Ray accidentally creates another Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Peter or Winston could go, "What can we make out of this?" And Egon could go, "Well, anything you can think of." And then Ray could go, "Aw, man." And then we just hear the footsteps of it stomping towards them. This idea again comes from Jay of the YouTube channel Fix It with Adam and Jay, so thank you again, Jay. I feel like this would probably work better in a third movie, though. It's a bit soon for that kind of a callback. But what do you think? Maybe a villain could decide to prevent good souls from going to heaven, so he makes them fused to their bad souls forever. Like Two-Face in Batman, or Ricky Coogan in Freaked, if you saw that one. Or maybe it's just one of them who looks like a Two-Face. Maybe some of them are like Janus in Roman mythology, or Voldemort in Harry Potter 1. Maybe some of them are like Julie and Ernie in the movie Freaked, or Bob and Walt in the movie Stuck on You. But maybe there's also metal clamps on them to keep them together, as the good one is trying to break free of the bad one. And maybe the good one is weighed down in hell instead of floating up to heaven because the bad one is too heavy. On the other hand, Slimer can fly around pretty high in the first movie, so maybe he just can't ascend to heaven because there's a filter in the clouds, so he can only go so high. Maybe that's why clouds are so associated with heaven, because they guard bad souls from the beyond. And or maybe there's a reversed gravity well when you die, so you get heavier the further up you go from Earth. unless you're a good soul. And or maybe they're just stuck in the place that's associated with their past trauma. Maybe that's the reason why they don't fly into heaven. Now, we said that energy created from the design of the apartment building and or from Gozer getting close to our world and or the dog monsters getting more active also seems to be helping the ghosts to take their physical form in our world, or at least more physical form than they had before. But on the flip side, when the EPA agent antagonist frees the ghosts from the Ghostbusters headquarters, the ghosts in turn seem to provide energy back to Gozer and or his dog monsters, to the point that the possessed Dana can break out of the effects of the Thorazine dosage. So it's like if you were to ride in the front seat of a tow truck to a car dealership to buy a car, then you use that new car to jumpstart the dying or dead battery of that tow truck so that it can tow you through some rough terrain. Gozer frees the ghosts from the car dealership that is hell, or whatever the ghost dimension is. So that might be something to keep in mind. One last question. Are the lion statues in the front of the library a factor in why the librarian ghost is the first to appear? Because of their similarity to the demon dog statues? Is it a resonance thing? Or maybe we're just getting a dramatic close-up of them in the first shot of the movie for the sake of ambiance. But I feel like, that could be an interesting idea to explore. So this system has a lot of areas that are undefined, and we have a lot of freedom when expanding on it to go in any number of directions we want to for the story. But so far, the bottom line is extra-dimensional beings can be summoned by worship and rituals, or by lightning rods that are lying in plain sight, like the apartment, especially if they contain extra mechanisms like the dog monsters who can possess people to make them do worship and or rituals. And this is what causes ghosts to be more visible and physical to us. And I think it's safe to say that this system that has been defined so far is somewhat convoluted and very contrived, and that's great news for us as we're trying to write a sequel, because maybe anything we add can be just as convoluted and just as contrived. Maybe we have some flexibility to allow us to decide on character directions first, and then just kind of build the supernatural aspects around it, as long as it's consistent with the few parts that we did definitively define in the previous film. And by the way, this system being established means that any ghosts being back in the sequel could be played as a mystery now, because the team already knows that any large number of ghosts being around is probably the result of some big supernatural threat attracting them. So as soon as there's an increase, the team would be on high alert to look for any big Gozer level threat. But they wouldn't necessarily know where the big threat is coming from or what it looks like. Maybe it's less obvious even to the audience, but at least less obvious to the team themselves. And this idea comes from Doug Walker, also known as the nostalgia critic of Channel Awesome. So thank you, Doug, for making that observation so that I don't have to. Also, Gozer was extra-dimensional. Maybe the second villain could be multi-dimensional? So he's in multiple time periods at once, or multiple places at once, or just multiple realms at once, like heaven, hell, and earth? Or maybe the supernatural villain could be more of a threat simply by being more effective than Gozer. Capturing someone in the very first scene of the movie, and knowing about the Ghostbusters, and thus being able to effectively counteract them. Kind of like how the Joker in The Dark Knight is weaker than the League of Shadows, but more effective against Batman anyway. And maybe the good guys are just off their game a bit in the second movie, kind of like in Empire Strikes Back when the Millennium Falcon's light speed won't ever work, Luke has to be saved, Han gets captured, and so on. Anyway, that concludes this magic system section. Stay tuned for the next chapter by using any of the various buttons that people like to press in these types of situations.